And it's very exciting to see so many people interested in the rich history of Westtown. Just a couple of notes, if you hadn't seen it already, we have copies of our Westtown history book, which are selling $20 over there. Our speaker decided he has to lose some copies of his history books. So there are some books on the table at the end which are free, and also we, like all of the missions of Westtown, are always looking for people who are interested in joining our monthly meetings, helping out by serving on the historical commission. So if you are interested in what we do, we invite you to come to one of our monthly meetings, which are on the second Tuesday of every month and held adjacent to us. You can just stop and listen to what we're doing, make your comments, ask questions, and find out what we're actually trying to accomplish. So we have information on the table about that as well. The fellow who started that is sitting right next to it. It's amazing. Walter, who knows an ungodly amount of information about Weston, sent me a copy of the PowerPoint, and I saw how much information was contained in here. I have no idea how and if the stuff would be put together. There was so much old and interesting information about Weston that we decided that we better put a map on behind it and have a pointer. Because even though I'm on the historic commission, I had to come up and say, Dave, I have no idea where this place is required. So we promise you that help us out with that. So without further ado, Dave Walters.
Thank you, Steve. As you can see from the title, this is a brief history of Westtown Township. The township was established in 1685, second oldest township in Chester County, which used to include Delaware County. It is a brief history, but all the stories that I briefly discussed here are contained in the history book. Plus, there's a lot more stories in that history book that we don't have time to go over this morning. So without further ado, let's see if this works. What's the matter there, Emil? Oh, there we go. From Farmland to Suburbia. Well, most of us, I think, probably moved to Westtown after 1960, but this is what it looked like, the Maple Shade Farm when the Marshall Jones family took that picture around 1960. There's the cows, there's the pond. I went over there in 2020, stood at pretty much the exact same location, and we now have 50 homes from Ruston Walk that are there today. Where's that on the back here? Okay, you know where Ruston High School? Yeah. All right, I gotta find that.
Should be on A, this is agricultural. A2,
Somewhere in there, you get cuts.
That's just about here's Ruston Walk right here, right in the middle of the town. Whoops. Here you can see the population growth. When the township was established, there were maybe 30 to 50 Lenape Indians living here or traveling through here. And the population did not change all that much from the first census in 1810 up until 1950. 3 digits. What happened? 1950 to 1980, Westtown started booming. They started developing it, selling the farms, putting up the houses we live in today. And the last census, there was over 11,000 people here in Westtown. You would never know it from the traffic, though, would you? But before the colonial settlers came, it was the land of the Lenape. They settled in small camps in eastern Pennsylvania, and they spoke an Algonquin language. They lived in established villages, and as far as we know, none of those established villages were in Westtown, but we know that they traveled along the rivers and streams to hunt and fish in this area. The Great Minquist Path went from Susquehanna to the Delaware, and the Indians went back and forth with trade goods, finding oysters in the river, that sort of thing. We know that ran through Westtown. You go up 202 here, about where the Ram's Head Diner is, there's a historical marker that talks about where the Minquist Path crossed from the Brandywine watershed into the Chester Creek watershed. Historians think it then ran over to Goshenville and then went south along what's Chester Road right now, right through the heart of Westtown. I think they probably had other paths that went along Goose Creek and the West Branch of the Chester Creek and Bradley Run and places like that, because we found relics at several locations. Right down the street here, the pond at Pleasant Grove is fed by a spring, and there's a little spring house there. And they found Indian arrowheads there, and they found Lenape artifacts at the Huey House on South New Street. So we know the Lenape were here. We included. This is an 1687 home map of William Penn's colony, and I'm not going to go into how William Penn came to acquire the colony of Pennsylvania. But you've probably all heard of the famous Welch tract, where William Penn sold land to people from Wales. Here's the Welch tract here, red arrows, and it includes today's Haverford Township, Radford Township, Lower Merion, Tredyffrin, that area. It did not include Westtown. That's a common misnomer. Here's Westtown over here. 1687 is already gone, and there are approximately 8 landholders that had sold land. As far as we know, none of them ever came here to Westtown, but there's their names on our early maps. Who were the early settlers here in Westtown? The first known settlers were the Hickmans. They came here about 1700. They lived in a cave where they gave birth to 3 of their 7 children. This is the late 1860 map of Westtown, and it still showed the Hickman's Cave. We believe it's in the vicinity of Nectar Lane. There's houses there today that nobody's ever been able to find the cave. We discussed it with a woman who's lived there for 60 or 70 years, and she doesn't remember as a child ever finding the cave. But here's the Hickman's Cave. Around 1700, a man named Aaron James began to assemble acres extending from Westchester Pike to Street Road. And you can see here, there's his name, Aaron James Pottery, and he owned land all the way down to Street Road. About the same time, the Hoops family acquired 200 acres over here, this side of the township, and he was the first justice of the peace. And then the William and Jane Huey arrived around 1730, and they started a plantation of 125 acres over in this section of the township. Huey family homestead is still there. The ruins are there on South New Street at General Howe Drive. We found Lenape and early colonial American artifacts there. The Westchester University archaeology students were working there a couple of years ago. That's owned by the township. The township paid to conserve the stonework here. There's an arch that was in danger of falling down. It's now been shored up. And we have a marker on order right now that will be coming in later this summer. And we'll have a little ceremony to place it there on General Drive this summer. Another early settler were the Taylors. They were Welsh Quakers. They came to Pennsylvania about the same time as Penn did. And in 1719, Philip and Ann Taylor purchased 200 acres in Westtown. When he died in 1732, the Taylors established a half-acre cemetery on their property. And for over 100 years, they and their close neighbors were buried there. Thomas Taylor was a colonel of the Westtown Thornbury Battalion during the Revolution. After the Battle of Brandywine, Hessian troops looted his homestead. We have a record filed by Mrs. Taylor of all the things that Hessians took. They took all the livestock. They even took the kitchen aprons. They took handkerchiefs. They took gloves. Everything that they could stuff in their knapsacks, they stole. In the 1970s, their former lands were sold to what's today Pleasant Grove, and the abandoned cemetery was covered over. And 2001, the Taylor descendants put a stone there recognizing the Taylor burial ground. There's been some military activity in Westtown over the years. Battle of Brandywine, 9/11/1777. Ground forces under Howe and Cornwallis came around on the flank of the Continental Army. They paused up here, Osborne Hill, to catch their breath, brew some tea, do some reconnaissance. At about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they swept forward against the Continental forces that are over here toward Sandy Hollow. And you can see here, this is Westtown where the exit is. This is today's western end of Graybilly Farm. And the British Light Infantry and the Hessian Jaegers swept across Graybilly Farm, across Street Road, and attacked the Continental troops. There's the township's militia monument on South Concord Road that honors the 5 militiamen that are buried in Westtown, buried in the Taylor graveyard. 3 of those are Taylors and 2 are the Possible ones.
If anybody wants to visit that, that spot, it's kind of hard to find.
Well, it's on the township's pump station property, right off South Concord Road, before you hit Street Road. There's a driveway you can pull in there and park. It's not a problem. When we come to the Civil War, we know that several dozen Westtown men joined the Union Army. One was Jesse Nilsson. He was a Quaker carpenter, fighting Quaker. He rose to the rank of Major Union Army. He was wounded in Tennessee. 2 of the Bailey boys joined, as did Lewis Pierce of the 97th Pennsylvania. Lewis Pierce lived on what we now know as the Stokes farm. He lived in that house there that's subject to a development plan. Lewis Pierce never came back to Westtown. He died of camp fever in South Carolina. After the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863, Westtown hosted a parole prisoner of war camp for a few brief weeks. And that was down along the railroad at the Oakbourne Road crosses under the railroad. And one of the prisoners, Corporal Thomas Nolan, later settled in Westtown. Some of you know his story, which we call the Westtown love story. I'll briefly mention it. Thomas Nolan was born in Ireland in 1832. We don't know exactly when he came to the United States as a young man. But in 1861, he was in Steubenville, Ohio. The war comes along. He's going to support his brand new country, and he joins the 25th Ohio Infantry Regiment. And they do a lot of fighting down in Virginia. And he's at Gettysburg, and his regiment's overrun by the rebels. He's captured along with about 30 of his fellow regimental members. Robert E. Lee can't take all the captured soldiers back to Virginia, so he paroles some of them, including Thomas Nolan. They put Thomas Nolan on a train. They bring him and 1,800 other parole prisoners of war to Westtown to settle at the Camp Parole or Camp Elder down by Oakbourne and Goose Creek and the railroad. So Nolan they're sitting around camp, and the farmers in the neighborhood need workers because a lot of their workers are off fighting too. So Thomas Nolan hires out to a man named Anthony Kirk. And Anthony Kirk has a farm which is on today's Ship and Lane. And he goes up to the farmhouse, and lo and behold, Anthony Kirk's wife, Ellen, is the girl he used to court back in Ireland. They haven't seen her, and he hasn't seen her in however many years. What a coincidence. The parole prisoners go back to their regiments, and December of 1863, Anthony Kirk dies. The widow, Ellen, gets in touch with Thomas Nolan, says, hey, you know, I'm free. He decides he's not going to re-enlist along with some of the other fellows, and he comes back to Westtown. He marries her. They have 4 children, and he died here in 1885, a respected member of the community. Good Hollywood script. We also have the Civil War legends of Isaac Winters. Isaac Winters was a black man who lived in West Goshen along Little Shiloh Road, and he was a member of the 43rd U.S. Colored Troops. He was a laborer, and he was sexton at Shiloh AME Church for about 60 years. But at the end of the war, soldiers were allowed to purchase their weapons to take home for hunting or whatever they wanted. For some reason, he bought his weapons, and he took them home, and years ago, they were found in a closet at the Forsyth House in West Goshen. And believe he probably worked as a laborer there, and these arms were found, and they're now in the private collection of a collector out in Gettysburg. But we know they're his because they have his initials on the stock. It has his regiment and everything else. And I understand for a short time they were on display at the Constitution Museum in Philadelphia. He died in 1911, and he was buried in Shiloh AME Church along with 14 of his fellow black veterans. Let's talk about some of the significant homes. Twaddle Jones Maple Shade Farm, that's the farm we use in that picture with the cows. Edward Twidell was raising horses and mules along Shiloh Road. And in 1913, Marshall Jones moved from Upper Darby and began raising dairy cows and potatoes here. During World War II, they brought German prisoners of war out from Fort Mifflin in Philadelphia. And they worked on the farm every day and were given a nice hot meal by Mrs. Jones. And for several years afterwards, they were in contact with some of the German prisoners who went back home to Germany after the war. As most of us know, in 2003, the school district took the farm and built Bayer Rustin High School, which opened in 2006. And eventually they sold off the excess land to develop those Rustin Walk homes. Here's one of the last working farms still in Westtown, Winter Farm. The farm has an 1864 base stone photo thanks to Jimmy Farrell. For 200 years, the Hoops family, and 100 years now, the Stratton and Stanton family have owned this property. It's down here in the south east corner. And they still raise sheep and hay, and they rent space for the Deer Creek Malt House, which sells malt to distributors, to distilleries and breweries. Here's an aerial photo of the McDaniel farm, which up here. McDaniels raised horses and Angus beef from the mid-20s until 1971. Horses were sold off of up here to the residents, and their farmhouse is now the rectory of St. Simon and Jude Church. That's how it looked as late as 1971. The George Fawcett Farm. The Fawcett's purchased land south of Westchester along the Wilmington Road. Up here, you know where the big electronic billboard is, and that area is where the Fawcett's were. Two of their sons were served in the militia. The grandson married a Yearsley neighbor and expanded the farm, and they had a general store and a creamery on the premises. The large house, which some of you may remember, was eventually isolated when they kept expanding 202. A couple of years ago, it was torn down. New development was built. Had a nice third floor with a mansard roof there. Stetson Middle School and Starkweather Elementary are located on the former Fawcett farm. And there are still a few historic structures right up here on 202 that were part of the Fawcett's Corner businesses, and there are plans that call for maybe some of that to be slated for demolition in the future. Here we have the Bailey Niven House. It's down on South Chester Road, right at 926. It's built in 1855 by Abraham and Mary Bailey. They named it Fairview, and there was 300 acres that had been part of that original Hoops family holdings. Two of their sons served in the Civil War. And there's a story here that, Swarthmore College could have been right here in Westtown. The Quaker educators who wanted to start Swarthmore College came out here to Westtown, and due to the proximity to Westtown School, they thought this would be a great place for a college. Well, they negotiated with Mr. Niven to buy the acreage. They got within $20 of what they were bidding and what he was asking, and they couldn't close the $20 gaps. So they looked elsewhere, and that's why Swarthmore College is in Swarthmore instead of in Westtown. It's passed through several owners since then, currently owned by the Gooches. And they've done a lovely job conserving that house, and they've won the 2018 Westtown Historic Preservation Award. I believe there's still, in addition to the house, there's several other tenant houses in the area and a barn that are still lived in by residents. So this is probably the most intact of all the farms we have here. Gray Billy Farm, never heard of it. Been subject to some discussions over the last 10 years, probably. Well, what's the historical Gray Billy Farm? William Penn sold this land to Richard Collett. Never came to the colony. But the land was managed by John Radley, for whom Radley run his name. During the Battle of Brandywine in 1777, the Taylors operated this property. And as I stated before, there were elements of the Crown forces that advanced across the western edge of Gray Billy Farm. In 1883, the property came into the hands of the McClures. It was later owned by a woman named Sarah Geiger. And in 1948, it was conveyed to the Robinsons, who still own it. Mr. Robinson was vice president and general manager of Acme Markets, and the chain founded by his brother. He was also president of Devon Horse Show, and he owned an historic collection of over 100 carriages and coaches. When he died, they attracted buyers at the auction from all over the world. He was noted for his philanthropy, and for example, he donated the land across the street here for Westminster Presbyterian Church. He died in 2001. And as we know, a number of development proposals have failed, and Westtown is now in the process of acquiring 200 acres at Gray Billy Farm for a passive recreational park. Here's our crown jewel of Westtown Township, Oakmore, home of James and Heloise Smith. This was the summer country home of these prominent Philadelphia 1%ers. You can imagine in the summer in the city when you didn't have cars and you had horse manure up to your knees along the sewage infested Delaware River, you wanted to get away into the country. And the Smiths had the money and the wherewithal to do that. So it was originally called Belmont, and it became Osborne, Oakborne. It became a convalescent home for women, and now it's the township treasurer. John Holm of Philadelphia Industrialist created Belmont in 1857. He built the original 2.5-story gray granite Italianate farmhouse. In 1882, James Smith, who was a shipping heir and a lawyer, his wealthy wife, Heloise Drexel Smith, came, and they changed the name to Oakmore because of the oak trees on the property. His wife, Heloise, was sister of noted financier Anthony J. Drexel. Helped finance the Civil War and founded Drexel University. And she was aunt to the first American-born Roman Catholic saint, Saint Catherine Drexel. So the Smiths hired a young architect from Westchester called Roney Williamson to enlarge and renovate the farmhouse. And he changed it into a high Victorian Queen Anne Revival style mansion. And they spent about $6 million in today's money to add a guest house, a stable, water tower, a lake, and a park. I think the township's spending $6 million right now to build more athletic facilities. But anyway, when they died, 1880, 93, and 95, their estates were valued at $400 million today's money. making them, I'm sure, the richest people that ever lived in Westtown. Anybody else? And most of that was willed to charities and religious institutions. Eloise Bechtel Smith gave very generously to some of the colleges and other institutions that her Catherine Drexler, their niece, was involved in. Mrs. Smith willed the property to the Philadelphia Episcopal Diocese, and they established the James C. Smith Memorial Home for sick and convalescing white women aged 21 and over. It operated as such from 1895 to 1971. And about 25 or 30 patients lived there at a time. They enlarged the facilities, and there was a in-mansion chapel created, which you can see if you take one of the tours that are involved. Westtown Township bought it in 1974 and almost demolished the mansion. But one member of the planning commission stood up and stopped it. And as you know, we now have a beautiful mansion. Maybe it needs some repairs, but it's a beautiful facility. It's now used for weddings, parks being expanded, and we've got festivals and movies and other kinds of recreation there. But it almost did not survive. And I have not found out the name of who that planning commissioner was. We owe him a pretty big debt. Too bad they didn't decide to say some other things. But anyway, here's a picture of our iconic water tower. It's used on the emblem of Westtown Township. And the pond that you can walk down, we used to have a gazebo and a pump station house there. They're no longer there. I think maybe the foundation of the pump house is still there. Beautiful trails. If you've never walked through Oakhorn Park, the next day when it's like 70 degrees, you might do that. Businesses and institutions we've seen. Darlington's Corner, right down the street here, 926 and 202. This was the only real crossroads village that Westtown had. There was a log cabin built in 1803 at the intersection. Street Road did exist, and the Wilmington Road existed. And in 1823, Thomas Darlington built the serpentine stone structure at the site, and he opened it as a drover's inn. And that's the house that's still, the building that's still there. It was operated in the late 1800s and was finally converted to a residence in the 20th century. Over the years, there have been a lot of different businesses at Darlington's Corner. There was a clock-making shop, cotton factory, Britain's General Store, blacksmith, and a millwright. And this is a picture of a blacksmith shop that I believe used to stand where the gas station is. It's in Thornbury, but this was really Westtown's crossroads, not Thornbury's. There were a number of residents, most of which are demolished, owned by McClure's, Darlington's, Taylor's, Woodward, Coburn, Cannon, and the Missy's Few. And the Missy's Few, I believe, were Black sisters. And they all lived there. And over the years, we've seen various houses demolished. There's one left down there. It's burned in a fire that still hasn't been demolished yet. Everything else is gone from Darlington's Corner. There's the Westtown Inn, circa 1930. You can't see that anymore because there's trees and brush and all sorts of landscaping that hide it. It's part of Craybilly Farm at the moment, owned by the Robinsons, and I think they have a tenant of people living there right now. built in 1823 to serve the thirsty and tired drovers on Wilmington Pike and Street Road. So drovers would come down Street Road, heading into the city. They'd be tired. Roads were dusty. You needed a little refreshment. That became their stop. And if you were going from Westchester to Wilmington with your wagon of wheat or something, you might stop at Westtown Inn for a little adult beverage also. On the corner where the CVS is, it's also Thornbury, but there's a painting of the Bartram's Orchard Market that used to sit there on the corner. Some of you might have lived here long enough to remember that one. Other institution in Westtown was the Westtown Pottery. This was Aaron James's establishment. He bought 126 acres up here. He established the pottery at Route 352 and where Green Lane is today. Green Lane used to be called Pothouse Road. He made this utilitarian red earthenware. He was kind of successful. He died. He was worth about $750,000 in today's money. And his sons operated that pottery until the 1860s. You can see some of his creations at the Philadelphia Art Museum and at the Chester County History Center, which is where that pot described November 28, 1820, can be seen. The only thing left of the pottery now is there's a spring house backyard or the side yard of one of the houses down that area. Britain's Quarry was another establishment. Serpentine rock, which was laid down about 600 million years ago, occurs in only 4 states, and there's a significant amount of it southwest corner of Weston. Over the years, 500,000 cubic yards of rock have been removed from Westtown quarries. It was operated by the Britton family until 1888, when a fire destroyed the quarry machinery and it began to fill with water. I guess there were springs there that you had to continually pump, and once the pump was destroyed, it filled up. But over the years, there's been a quarry swimming association, which has operated a club for more than 100 years now. I don't know that you can go back there unless you're a member of the Quarry Swimming Association. Another institution was the Pennsylvania Epileptic Hospital and Colony. Here's a picture of the women's cottage. There was an identical men's cottage, and between the two of them was an administration building, all of which are gone today. What's there today was built later. But it was chartered in 1896. In those days, treatment of epilepsy was not at the same standard as it is today. Sort of were sent out in the country to be isolated and cared for. 96 of their acres came from the Smith estate. By 1927, there were 127 patients. They had a farm, a power plant, a creamery. The creamery still exists on Pleasant Grove Road, right across from where the township has built that basketball court. By the 1940s, treatments for epilepsy improved. Most epileptics were able to live at home, and the last patients left in 1958. After that, it served as a hospital for mentally ill children. That lasted until 1965. And then for 2 years in the mid-60s, the facilities was at John Knox Junior College. It was a Christian establishment. It only lasted 2 years. When that closed, Rodentia operated it as it still does, as a treatment center for addiction since 1969. Well, we have many houses of worship here in Westtown Township. This is the first. Started out as a Methodist church in 1807. 10 years later, the Methodists moved to Westchester, and they sold it to the local Black community. So from 1817 until about 1920, this was the focal point of the Black community in Westtown and West Goshen. Many of the parishioners were employed at Westtown School. So a number of them owned land in the area. They were farmers, there was a blacksmith, there were carpenters, there were wagoners, that sort of thing. We believe that it was a probable underground railroad site. As you know, that church no longer exists, but it's here on Little Shiloh, right almost at the corner of Shiloh Road. There was a cemetery there in which there's more than 100 Black individuals have been buried, including 15 veterans of the Civil War. Two other churches, Westtown Friends, the meeting house there on the school property was built, I think, about 1920. So that's not, oh, it's more than 100 years old now, but the school was founded in 1799, so that wasn't the original meeting house. We have Advent Lutheran Church at Chester and Green Lane. We have two Catholic parishes in the area, St. Maximilian Colby, right down the street, and St. Simon and Jude at Chester Road and Westchester Pike. We have across the street here Westminster Presbyterian on land that was donated by Robinsons. They moved out from the borough in 1991. And we have the Church of the Loving Shepherd on South New Street. Schools. Well, there's the oldest. Westtown School, founded in 1799. What land from James Gibbons. It's co-educational from the start, as the Quakers believed in educating women. Over the years, about 30,000 students have attended the school here in Westtown. The oldest continuously functioning co-ed boarding school in the United States. It was only in 1933 that non-Quakers began to be admitted. And it was a pretty self-sufficient community. Over the years, they operated a grist mill and sawmill, a dairy. They had a brick making operation to provide bricks for the older buildings there. They had a farm, which is still used by tenant farmers. They had a 14-acre lake for swimming, which you could see as you drive down the road there, Westtown Road. And former President Eisenhower has visited his two granddaughters who were at the school, and before that, First Lady Lou Hoover had visited the school. It was more than a school, as I said, and it was a farm, brickworks. And here's a picture of the grist-mill sawmill. This is around 1900. This mill is gone now. This house is still there. As you drive this town road, there's a curve, and that house is there. It's been improved a little bit. And here's another view from the other side of the sawmill. Here's the discharge the mill race into the West Branch of Chester Creek. Some of us were privileged to go down there and we found remains from the mill races. And in this vicinity here, where this used to be, we found some pretty big dressed blocks of stone that formed like looks like a hammers. But that's no longer there except for that house. Here's two of the other early Westtown public schools. One is what's now the gatehouse, the Foreign Park. It's formerly Jesse Merchant Schoolhouse, which opened around 1807. And here's Union Independent School number 3, which is at the corner of 926 and Street Road, Street Road in Chester. For years, that was a photography studio. I think there's somebody else in there, chiropractors or something like that. There's the classes at Union School. This was before the Westchester Area School District was founded.
You know, approximately whatever.
Probably around turn of the century also. Two more Westtown schools. At Center School, here's a picture in 1913. Center School is still there on Shiloh Road. And here's Pleasant Grove School, 1904. I believe this is the one that became the township building, the police station, which was demolished 10, 15 years ago. But notice, these schools are integrated. There are Black children in all the pictures. I had the Union School picture before. In the borough of Westchester, the schools were segregated. There was a separate elementary and high school for the Black kids. Not in Westtown, not more than 100 years ago. Right. And of course, here's Barry Rustin High School and Rustin Walk Bronx that are on the former site of Maple Shade Farm. And lastly, we come to transportation. Believe it or not, that's 202. Quieter times. It was an Indian trail, became a wagon road. The wheat that was grown in this area was world famous. It was shipped to the port of Wilmington and sent to the Caribbean and to Europe. It's very good wheat. It's called Brandywine Fine. It's one of the first trademarks in the United States. But anyway, it was a wagon road, and then they planked it. And I think the next issue of the Gazette had a story coming up about planking and macadamizing Wilmington Road. Yes. Look for your next newsletter. Today, we know it's 4 lanes of heavy traffic lights, businesses, whatever. We have not been able to identify those two houses, where they were. That's Wilmington Pike in quieter times. Then we have the railroad. The Westchester Philadelphia Railroad service through Median to Philadelphia began in 1858. We actually have a marker down by Goose Street that has 1854 on it when they first started to build into this area. But the station, it's actually in Westtown. It's been known over the years as Lecompton, Hemphills, Belmont, and then after the Smiths bought the mansion and has opened. The railroad was electrified in 1928 after it came under control of the Pennsylvania Railroad. This is the station that was built in 1880 and was closed in 1961 and demolished shortly thereafter. And railroad service to Westchester was ended by SEPTA in 1986. There may have been another railroad line would have gone through Weston. It's called the Chester Creek and Brandywine. And this was in about 1878. It would have come off the line at the Westtown station, would have followed Taylor's Run, crossed over 202, run along Radley Run to the quarry, and then on down to the railroad in Pocopson. It was going to service the quarry. It was never built, but you can still see in the backyard of one of the houses on Westbourne Road where they built part of the embankment, and it's still there. Never had tracks on it, but the embankment is still visible in somebody's backyard right about here. Here's another picture of the Oakbourne station showing Ellen Speakner, who was the postmistress from 1883 to 1928. The Westtown Post Office used to be an Oakbourne station, and they lived here on the second floor of the station. Here's where it was electrified. There's a picture of see the steam engine stopped at the station. I wish we had a clearer photo of that, because I love trains. Now on Sunday, you may hear whistles down there because there's an excursion train that's been operating since 1997. Here's a picture of the train crossing Goose Creek in Oakbourne Park. Every Sunday during the summer, there's a picnic train, there's Easter Bunny trains, there's Santa trains, or whatever. So the line is still in use. If you're walking along there, just be careful. We had a trolley line too. The Red Arrow trolley line was operated by the Philadelphia Westchester Traction alongside Westchester Pike from 1898 until 1954. State Highway Commission decided to enlarge Westchester Pike. Decided there wasn't room for the trolley anymore, and the trolley line was abandoned. Here's a photo taken in 1948 near Manley Road, in front of where Marketplace Square is and the Tesla dealership. Again, there might have been another trolley line. The president of the Red Arrow was a man named Merritt Taylor. He was an alumni of Westtown School. And he thought it would be a great idea to run a trolley line from basically along what's now Green Lane and Johnny's Way, cross country into Westtown School. The caveat that Westtown School paid for this trolley line. And, they decided they weren't going to spend that kind of money to run a trolley because their students came out on the train. They were already close enough to the school. So the trolley line was never built, but we almost had a trolley line running along Johnny's Way. Last, off we go, picking up the airmail in 1935, right across the street. At Fawcett Hill on the present site of Starkweather School, there was a landing strip where one of our old-time residents says she remembers U.S. airmail planes coming down and hooking bags of mail. I don't think the service lasted long. We also had an airport on the Taylor's Farm where Pleasant Grove is today. He had a grass landing strip there. So we've had every kind of transportation here, I guess, except spaceships, but they're coming.
Yeah.
So that's a brief history of Westtown Township. I took almost an hour. Like I said, all these stories are in that book and more. And from my personal collection, there's free history books back there for anybody who wants them. But is there any questions that we can try to answer? I'm not the only expert. There's other people here with knowledge.
Exactly, located before the train station, was it by the train bridge?
Yep. If you look closely, especially in the winter, you can still see a flat area where the entrance to the off of Oakhorn Road ran back to it. It's a flat area. We've had John Hoppy, who used to be on the Historic Commission, went out there with a metal detector at one point, and he actually found a letter opener and some other things that were probably from the post office. And back in the woods, there's a beautiful retaining wall that the Pennsylvania Railroad built in 1885 or something. It's still there, covered with vines and everything. That's where it was. Sir. The present one, I believe it was 1881. There's lots of photographs floating around. Before there was a bridge there, Street Road crossed at grade, and there's pictures of carriages waiting for the train, and that was the milk stop. As you saw, there were a lot of dairy farms in Westtown. There was a morning milk train, and the farmers would take their cans of milk to Westtown, load them on the milk train. They'd go into the city. Empty cans would come back. They'd pick up in the afternoon. Westchester Pike in those days was, it took you all day to get into the city. Probably still does. The train got there in about an hour. Other questions?
I would go back to the early surveying records of the township, surveys.
Every property sold, there's a deed on file at the archive. So if you lived on a certain piece of, or you have a house, you can find on your deed all the way back who owned it.
Also, Dave, you can find that electronically, some of it,
Yeah, some Westchester views, right?
and you find the address and it may tell you the history of your property. It makes, not all our.
Like the present Stokes farm and the farm, the Kirk farm where Thomas Nolan married the widow. We know that land used to be owned by the uncle of Benedict Arnold's wife. So we have, and if you read these deeds, it talks about a pin in the ground and an oak tree, and it's very hard to figure out, but all these deeds still exist. If you really want to know who owned your land when.
Order of deeds on lot west of the house. Okay, it's a modern building here across from the cafe. It's all right. Same building too. That's what all the deeds are. We get back to this distance.
Dave, I have a question. Why does the Westtown post office and Westtown train station not in Westtown?
Because the ancient line that divided Thornbury and Westtown, why is it on that side of the Street Road?
It's not.
I have no idea. I have no idea. Maybe it was something that was easier to make right turns into there or something.
Yes.
It used to be at Oakhorn, and then they moved it to Westtown. Probably because of the volume of mail coming out of Westtown School. And the one in Oakhorn Station was propped up over the years by the epileptic home and the convalescent home, because people would come out and visit their relatives and that sort of thing. But by 1961, the railroad stopped stopping there and toured the dilapidated place there. Anybody else have any corrections for me or anything? Sir?
Not correct. Sure, the corner trial, post trial,
Yes.
is Westtown acquired that property.
No, they have not.
I heard it was appraised for it.
Yes, I've heard that it was appraised for $170,000. But no, it hasn't been acquired. Stephen?
Good morning. Great presentation. Question, folks, did you mention that they, is that the area of Oswald where they first settled in Westtown? So I think connected with the grand folks and that way the fall of, kind of question.
I think all these families are connected. If you look back, in those days, families had a dozen kids. A couple of them were going to die. So you have a couple generations of 10, 12 kids marrying, having 10, 12 kids. After a while, all the Hoops, all the Darlingtons, all the Taylors, the Yearsleys are all interrelated. You go over to Birmingham Cemetery, you probably, your genealogist can figure out who's related to who. But when you only had, until 1950, 700, 800, 900 people living here, everybody was marrying the girl next door. And, you know, they knew their cousins and they had friends and they all, you did what you could.
The Hickman case, has, artifacts, a chair. I don't know if anybody's aware, and some, sharks, dishes and stuff like that, that used to be on display at the history center. And it was very interesting, the chair was amazing, but I think it's, we were there for the exhibit of the 26th cavalry covered troops.
Yeah.
And I spoke to the gal there and she said it's probably in basement somewhere, which is a shame, but it's very interesting to see.
We'll have to,
The cave,
we'll have to check that out.
yeah,
Connor Hepton,
yeah.
president over there. A lot of stuff has disappeared there. Like they had, when General Galusha Pennypacker died, his family donated his uniform, his sword, his saddle, and whatever. The saddle has disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to it. Things walk off from museums all the time, especially back before you had electronic security measures and everything. That would be very interesting to find a chair from the cave, because the Bartram descendant who lives there now, as I said, grew up in that area. They looked for the cave and they could never find it. So it was probably collapsed or filled in, but it wasn't where that Nectar Lane development runs off next to the Bartram property. Anything else? Great. Well, grab books, sign up, buy books. We'll see you, what's the next lecture in October? Is it about the mansion or something?
I'm gonna ask about the child.
September.
Here's a Facebook page. Facebook group for the child. Certainly interesting child, but you can see what's the question.
Right, we're so for leisure, again, we're for our class, for you guys are great in the summer, and in the fall, we'll have 2 more, that'll see, that'll also be nice. We hope to see you all, and we're going to forgive you that, that